This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Leary, and this is X Job Downloaded. And today I'm going to interview Robert D'Amico. Have I said that correctly, sir?
You did. You did.
Fantastic. Now, Rob is a former member of the US Marine Corps and was with the FBI for some considerable time. But before we get underway, Rob, what was the inspiration to join the US Marine Corps and then go on and join the FBI?
I'm not actually sure, but I'm trying to think what year my mom had found it. She was cleaning out the house. She found something I'd written in second grade, and it said, "What do you want to be?" And it had Marine and FBI agent. I assume I saw a movie about the Marines. I don't know if I don't remember watching a TV show back then about FBI. So I don't know exactly what, why it was so specific. But I forget what year she found that. And obviously, I ended up doing both. I actually wanted to go in the Marines first. I wanted to enlist out of high school. My parents wanted me to go to college. So the compromise was I enlist in the reserves. I go to boot camp after high school, like the day after high school. I went to boot camp and then finished boot camp, went right to Ohio to go to college there and then be in the reserves while I went to college. I majored in accounting because I knew the Bureau liked accounting majors.
Oh, wow.
And I sucked at English. So math was my better skill. So majored in accounting. And then that was the backdrop because obviously the Bureau hires a lot of accountants and lawyers. So that was one thing I knew. So went on active duty after college in the Marines as an officer. And then in 1992, had to augment to get on active duty. The Marine Corps was cutting back. I didn't. So I went back in the reserves with the Marines. And then we ended up training with the FBI down in Mobile, Alabama, where my reserve unit was. And then they'd been on a hiring freeze, so I couldn't apply. And then in 1995, they opened up hiring. And I was quickly hired. Being a Marine officer, accounting background, already having a clearance type of thing. So that started my Bureau career.
So you joined as a reserve, then you went into regular service, and then you went back into the reserves. Was there a difference between the two, going from reserve into?
Yeah, there is. Now the wars after 9/11, active duty reserve guys did so much active duty in war zones that it kind of meshed the two a bit. But before, like reserves was 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer, except for the guys that were getting off active duty and then going into the reserves. It was a different mindset. It was a different type of thing, but you still learn a bunch that way. The second reserve unit I went to was reconnaissance. So a lot of those guys had come off active duty, hadn't been recon Marines, and then were still doing it. And they traveled across the country because there's only a couple recon units in the reserves. So it was a little bit different there, but really after 9/11, the reserves and their experience changed dramatically.
And how did the FBI and the Marines work together? Did they give you time to undertake active duty? Or
so when I first joined the Bureau, they made you resign your commission or any of your status as even a reservist. When Hoover was in charge, he moved everyone like every 3 years because he did not want his people to get loyal to a community. He didn't want them to get homesteaded. He wanted them loyalty solely to the Bureau. So he also made it a policy that you couldn't do any reserve duty as an FBI agent because you were, quote, critical in national security. Right. So at the academy, they stood over you and made you sign your resignation back to whatever service you were in. So I did that in the FBI Academy, and like 6 months later, I'm down in Miami. I'm in my first office, and the Marine Corps sends me correspondence saying, "Did you request to resign or something?" And since I didn't have the Academy staff over me, I said no. And I ended up doing reserve duty for points. Like I ended up volunteering at Southern Command, which was down in Miami. I had all the clearances because I was a weapons of mass destruction liaison between the military command and the field office. So I had some people in there, and there's this Marine gunnery sergeant in the admin side who got me orders with I couldn't be recalled. It was voluntary. I was doing it for points, but it was totally against Bureau policy.
Wow.
There was a couple other people I found out that were doing that. But after 9/11, the way that the military changed how, when you got released from active duty, you still had an obligation for the reserves because of the wars going on.
Yeah.
And if the Bureau, it was against Bureau policy. So if the Bureau wanted to take anyone from the military, they really had to change their policy. Hoover wasn't there. People started looking at it and said, this is dumb. We want people from the military. So now you can actively do both reserves and FBI. You can go on active duty. You can do a year. You still get promoted. It's a great program. Unfortunately, it wasn't around when I started doing it. I was actually working at the Pentagon because I got transferred to Quantico on the hostage rescue team. So I took my reserve duty to the Pentagon. I found the Special Ops Division guys that I knew, went in there. Again, they don't have many reservists with TSSCI clearances. I said, hey, I'm willing to do this for just points, no pay. And I started doing that before 9/11. And then after 9/11, I was sneaking off. I'd work a full day work. I'd go up to the Pentagon, throw on my uniform. And one time there was a big VTC with the Bureau, video teleconference with the Bureau. And I was in uniform and they wanted me in it. So I'm thinking, oh my God, if someone in the Bureau sees me standing there in this Marine Corps major's uniform, you're going to be like, what the hell? Like, it was one of those. So I kind of stood, like I saw where the camera was. I made sure I stood behind someone as that was going on.
So were you attached to the Pentagon when 9/11 took place?
No, I was actually the hostage rescue team. Most of us were on the West Coast training. We were getting ready to do this big training event. And what it happened was I was one of the new guys. So I was watching the gear overnight. These techs come in and they're rushing around. And they're like panicking, trying to find stuff to set up a command post. And we're like, me and the other guy are like, what do you mean command post? Like, because we were having some congressmen coming out to watch us train the next day. And we're like, and then they're like, you guys don't know. And they threw on one of the satellite TVs and they showed us a plane flying into the Trade Center. Wow. So United actually donated a plane to the FBI to get us home because here's half the country's national level counterterrorism team on the West Coast. So United donated a 757, I think it was. A couple of generals that were stuck on the West Coast met us at the San Francisco airport, and we took off. We actually flew over the Pentagon flying in. Wow. And I looked out the plane, and I'm like, God, I hope someone told them that, this is a good plane, because there's no other commercial aircraft in the air. No. We had F-16 escorts, I think, the whole way to make sure that we didn't deviate, But when I looked at the Pentagon as we flew it over, I could tell where we saw smoldering, and that was where my reserve office was. Wow. So, like, it was one of those very surreal moments coming in that night, flying over the Pentagon and seeing that.
Yeah, I bet it was. So where did you come from in the USA? Where's home for you?
I grew up in northern New Jersey. It's I always tell, well, if you don't know, just look where The Sopranos was filmed. I grew up there. Basically some of the scenes in Sopranos, Fountains of Wayne was a big thing where you buy fountains for your yard and stuff, which some of the mob guys love. Was in scenes, and that was right down the road where I grew up.
I've flown into Newark, and of course you can see the skyline from a different perspective when you come into Newark, and it's an amazing place. And I've got a number of friends in New Jersey.
What's really funny, like our high school senior year photo, we have a flag, and we may have taken the flag our senior year from a place. It's huge. I mean, the flag's huge. It's literally like 70 feet by 30 feet, and we didn't understand how much it was actually worth when we thought of that great idea. But when we did our senior class photo, I think statute of limitations is over on that one, so I can talk about it. Yeah. But we kept this flag hidden, and then the senior year photo, we picked Liberty Park to do our picture. So you have this flag, and literally like 30 people can be behind it. So we surrounded the flag with the entire senior class, and behind us, you could see the World Trade Centers. And that's our class picture. And there's a number of people from my town who died in the World Trade Centers. I have some friends whose husbands had died, and some real tragedy in that. But the connection to 9/11 and the World Trade Centers. My sisters lived in Battery Park City, which is right by the Trade Center. My one sister worked in it for a while, so there was a lot of connection. And when that happened, it was just really unbelievable.
Horrendous. Can you believe that's 23 years ago this September?
No, time does fly.
Yeah, it does. And Yeah, it's a very sobering place to go to. But you're at high school. Were there other kids there that were going to go and become Marines and then join the FBI, or were you the only one?
It's funny. There's a number of guys that I joined the Marine Corps with, Sean and John. John, he went enlisted with me, but he went active duty enlisted. Dude was unbelievable. So they did like 35 dead hang pull-ups. He was just a stud. He ended up just doing one term though. And then Sean was another guy that wanted to go in the Marines and did it through college and went on as an officer, who I still talk to both of them. And then so there's some people that want to be Marines, and really no one mentioned FBI. The only thing that happened in their town that people knew about the FBI is there was a shopping center right across the high school, and like I think a sophomore, junior, and senior, you could go over there for lunch type of thing instead of eating it in the cafeteria, and that's where a lot of them did. And one day at like lunch, there's a bunch of like students out there getting food for different places. All of a sudden, this van pulls up, and this guy's walking out of this Stop and Shop grocery store, and the van opens. Like 3 guys get out, jump them, and put them in the van and drive off. And it turns out it was our mayor. And everyone thought it was like a mob hit, because I mean we grew up around mob guys, so we kind of like, oh geez. Turns out it was the FBI. They had indicted him, and they wanted to grab him and try to probably get him to cooperate beforehand. So that eventually came out. So that's the only thing FBI in high school. And people, I have to admit, we had a pretty wild time, and everyone from like middle school, grade school. We used to play mob on the playground, like as when you're a little kid and stuff. So there was a lot of people surprised I went in the FBI. I went back to the first reunion, and they're like, "You're doing what?" Like there's some shock value in that. Yeah,
because how far are you from Hoboken?
Probably like 15 miles. Like everything took so long to drive up there because of traffic. I thought like Long Island was like 5 states away, and I figured out later when there's no traffic, it's like a 20-minute drive. But yeah, Hoboken right on the edge is because Giant Stadium's kind of in Secaucus was like 12 miles from my house, and Hoboken's just before the bridge.
The home of Frank Sinatra. The when you went to the academy, you had a background in accountancy. Was that a common degree to have when you went in?
Oh my God, it was funny. So your class back then was about 50 people, 50 new agents and stuff. And the first day you sit in your chairs and you introduce yourself. And I was at the front, and they started in the back. And one of the guys sitting next to me, Dan, really good friend of mine, great agent who retired. He was suite mates with me. So your room had 2 people in it, and then there was a connecting bathroom. There's another room with 2 people. So you either had a roommate or a suite mate. So Dan was a suite mate, and he's a special forces captain, coming out. He's a Green Beret, so we're talking, we're getting along. They start introducing themselves, and, the Bureau just gone on a hiring freeze for like 3 years. So they haven't hired anyone new. So we had Harvard law grads. We had a guy who had like 3 master's degree. We had a rocket engineer from Pratt Whitney, and like all these, like I'm sitting there thinking in the Marine Corps, having an accounting degree was like, you had a lot of history majors and, physical, like, so my degree in the Marine Corps is a bit different, but in the FBI, I'm looking at Dan going, are we like cannon fodder, or are we supposed to take the rounds so we can save, these smart ones? But I have to admit, that I did beat the Harvard law grad on the law test in there. I kind of took my academics seriously with that. Just that was fun, in fact. But yeah, the degrees are so. The Bureau really does hire everyone, and it's more of a process. They like accountants and lawyers. One, I think accounting, because accounting is a very it's a process. How do you do audits and stuff like that? Same thing as investigation. Everyone thinks, oh, it's to follow the money. I don't think it's totally to follow money. I think it's the process of accounting and how we, logically go through something to look where money's missing. And then obviously lawyers, because you understand the law to a point. But they really do hire totally across. They used to hire a lot of former military and cops. I think that's gone up and down depending on what folks are with. I think big one now, cyber, and if you can speak languages as a secondary, like your major degree. But some of the folks that come in the bureau have crazy backgrounds, and they just dive in. It doesn't mean that's what they're going to do. It's just the diversity of who applies.
And of course, next to Quantico, you've got the Marine Corps, because I remember turning up there and we went to the wrong Quantico. You've got there's a golf course and there's the Marine Corps. But what was that like when you turned up at Quantico? Because you've got that iconic site where Silence of the Lambs was filmed and all that. What was that like going there?
Are you like in my head somehow? Because I have a Silence of the Lambs story. So as a Marine officer, you do your basic training. It's called the basic school. It's right there at Quantico, and it's actually on the side. It's just down the road from the FBI Academy. So I went there in 1989. I was there as a second lieutenant, 6 months of the basic school, and then if you were going infantry, you stayed there for another 3 months to do this infantry officers course. And if you do those, you're in the woods all the time. Like you're like in the woods surrounding the FBI Academy, there's a bunch of training there, and you see Marines and blah, blah, blah. So at one point, we're running the Marine Corps endurance course, which is an obstacle course followed by this long endurance course. And we used to run it all the time. And one day we're running and we see this yellow tape and everyone blocked off, and we're like, then we see movie cameras, and we're like, they're filming Silence of the Lambs when I was a second lieutenant. So another story came up, because we didn't know they called that the Yellow Brick Road. That was a Marine Corps endurance course. We ran it all the time, but it's also the FBI's Yellow Brick Road. We couldn't figure out why these bricks were painted yellow when we were in the Marines. Now I obviously know. So another time though, we're at infantry officers course, and it was a day of the Marine Corps were changing tactics to small unit leaders leading more and doing things. So we were out running around at night all the time. We maybe slept an hour. You go out Sunday night, Monday, you didn't get much sleep, and you're running around the base doing all kinds of infantry stuff. And at one point we brought some chaos on, and we had to escape and evade to the secondary LZ. And it really wasn't part of the problem. We kind of made it that way. And the Marine instructors, they're all captains, were trying to rally us up, because we were way outside the exercise. And so we had thrown this log in a road because we couldn't make it on foot to the secondary LZ. So we were going to commandeer a vehicle. And we threw this log on the road to block the road. And the first, car up is this Humvee with one of our captains. And we ambush them. We jump out with our, guns, even though we had blanks and stuff, and we were threatening to take his vehicle. And he's like, guys, you can't do this. This is not part of the problem. So then all of a sudden we see this pickup truck coming, and we're like, okay, you can go. And he looks at his, he goes, do not take a, civilian car. Do not do that. So we're like, oh, no, we won't. So sure enough, the pickup truck comes up, and they're looking at us, and it's a bunch of guys in tactical gear, like camis and stuff, but they got beards and all. And it turns out that they're guys from the FBI's hostage rescue team, and they were out training, and they're driving back. And there's a lot of former Marines on HRT, and one of them's they're like, hey, what are you guys doing? We're like, hey, we got to get to LZ Sparrow in 15 minutes. They're like, jump in. So we jump in the back of the pickup truck, and we're laying down there. And they're driving. A couple of them are sitting up in the back of the pickup truck. And as we're kind of sticking our heads up, we pass by this other training area, and we see the captain by the Humvee. It turns out the base colonel is out there reviewing IOC training, and the colonel's back's to us, and the captain's facing us. We pop up out of the back of the pickup truck, and we wave at him, and he's just shaking his head. He's like, oh my, So those were my two experiences when I was with the Marines with the FBI Academy. But when I was at the Academy later in 1995, back then you could just drive up right to the FBI dorms and go in. There was no security around the Academy. And Oklahoma City happened when I started the FBI Academy.
Wow.
And they put up temporary, you couldn't get in. And now it's they got all the security up around the FBI Academy, but back then you could just drive in. So it changed a bunch on the interaction between the two, but there's a long history of action between, or relationship between, the Marine Corps and FBI.
The Quantico, people don't realize the history behind it, but the building sets where you do your training, they're from iconic crime scenes, aren't they? They're, the cinema.
Oh, the Hogan's Alley.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Hogan's Alley is the mock-up town that's on the backside of like all your academic stuff and your, the gyms and PT stuff. So it's a town that some of the buildings, they actually just have FBI workers in there, like, or services unit that fixes everything. They have warehouses and trucks and everything else. And then part of the town is there's a bank, there's a pharmacy, there's a hotel, there's a movie theater that you're talking about, so that they can stage crimes, and FBI agents go out and they interview people, or they arrest people, or they're doing evidence, all these other things in, quote, a town. And like the movie theater has the movie that's playing, was, I think, where, what was that? The criminal from, the 20s and 30s.
Dillinger.
Yeah. So that's where the same movie that was playing when Dillinger was taken down is up on the, on the movie theater and things like that. And, there's a social club. When I did Undercover, a bunch of our training was in there, that you had to go in and, meet a bunch of bikers or mob guys in these different, situations in a, quote, town. And that's what the Hogan's Alley is called. Yeah.
How did you get selected for the roles that you undertook? Because you did the undercover work, and then you went on and, obviously the world changed, and so did science, because you went into the UAV world. I mean, how did you get selected for each role?
So my first office is funny story too. So in new agent training, like your classmates are there, and you're shooting qualifications. You have to pass all these things. And one person, I forget, she was having problems with the shotgun. Again, shotgun's a weapon that you have to qualify on, but especially with someone's weight and stuff like that, if you don't hold it well, if you're not doing well. And you get your office selected in like the first 6 weeks. So I found out my office was Miami, but you don't find out what you're going to do until you're getting close to graduation. And at one point, they sent me, because I had the accounting degree, to the white collar, like the healthcare white collar squad. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I like Miami, and I'm going to be doing healthcare. And I was depressed. And this one girl, she was having problems with the shotgun. So me and my sweet mate Dan just got out and helped train her to, like, hey, how do you manage the recoil on the shotgun and stuff? And she ended up passing easily. And then all of a sudden, like a couple weeks later, I get a notice that they changed the squad I'm going to, and I'm going to the Violent Crimes Fugitive Squad. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. I'm going to just go, get violent, fugitives. And I think, because I found out her dad worked at the Miami office for a long time, and I think he may have had something to do with it. So if she's listening ever, thank you, because that was a great squad. So my first squad was fugitives, and it was fun. Like, we just went out and just arrested, because so many fugitives come to South Florida. And at one point, though, about a year in, I'm helping teach in a safe streets class to the other squads, and the organized crime squad was out there. So they break for lunch. I brought my lunch, and the supervisor was there, and he starts asking me about my background. And I tell him about New Jersey and growing up with mob guys, since he works on a squad, the mob, and then tell him, I was in the Marines, and between the Marines and FBI, I did some private security on a guy who owned a yacht type of thing. And he just looks at me, goes, would you like to do undercover? And I'm like, well, that's one of the things I've always wanted to do, but normally in the Bureau, you got to have 5-7 years before they even start looking at you do undercover. He goes, well, we have a case where we really need someone with your background. It's a mob case. There's some other people involved, but there's a yacht involved and a nightclub, and we need a younger guy to watch. There's a main undercover, and there's someone else we're working with. We kind of need a young guy to be able to watch over things, not a main player in the case. So that's how I ended up getting picked for that, and ended up doing that 2 years deep cover against the mob. And part of it was I was supposed to be a bit role player, but the mob guy liked me. I was an Italian kid from Jersey. They liked the fact that I was in the Marines and was very respectful, because if you know the mob, it's a very organized hierarchy thing. But also, if you grow up, like, you can get in trouble talking to the wrong person. There's people, like, if you're associate, who you're allowed to talk to and not allowed to talk to. And if you mistakenly do that, you can get hurt, just not that they know you're a cop, because you're doing things wrong. So having grown up in that, I kind of understood where that was. And I ended up doing fairly well in it because they kind of took to me. The main undercover, he only came in a couple weeks a month, if that. And I was taking care of his yacht, his nightclub, and all this other stuff. So we ended up doing more and more. And that was really kind of unheard of, doing it that young, because I ended up interviewing with Joe Pistone, the whole book, Donnie Brasco. He gotten back in the Bureau when Louis Freeh came back in, because he really was wronged at the end of his first FBI thing. But he was working down here, and they said, hey, if you interview with him and he says it's okay for you to do this undercover, we'll allow it. And I went in, and he was like, this mob guy, like, in this offsite, undercover thing. And we end up, he knew the town I grew up in, because when he was doing his 6 years undercover, his family lived in the town next to me. He actually asked me, do you know the girl by the name of blah? I won't say her name. And I said, yeah, I know her. He goes, how do you know her? I said, she worked at the gym I worked out at. I probably asked her out every day because she's really good looking. If her steroid boyfriend ever found out, he would, beat me up. And it turns out it was his, like, goddaughter. So we started talking about different people that we knew in the town. And a couple of them I knew personally, because I dated someone's daughter or whatever, that he knew the father from the mob thing. And we happened to be, I think, at a location together before someone went to jail. They were having I was there with the guy's daughter, dating her, and he was there as, it was crazy. But at the end of it, he really did say, hey, look, you're going to do fine against the mob guys. They're going to like you because you understand them. What you're not going to understand, all your stress is going to come from the Bureau. There's going to be jealousy in the office. There's going to be all these other politics that you don't know why. Like he said, you can always predict the mob guy, what decisions he's going to make, because greed and respect are the two things that drive everything they look at. How much money can I make, and how is it going to look to everyone else? And that drives it. He goes, what you're not going to understand is why the Bureau is making decisions, because you don't know their motivations. And he was absolutely right. To 100%. All my stress came from the Bureau. A lot of jealousy in the office of people who wanted to do undercover, who weren't in a position, they didn't have the background, they didn't have whatever, and they looked down on you like, hey, why is this new guy driving, like, my Bureau car was a convertible Corvette. I got to, again, me hanging out in nightclubs or strip clubs is not what I wanted to do. Like, and it's as dumb as that sounds, but you're there. And it's a lot of stress trying to remember everything that you said, that they say, that they don't, you're always thinking they know who you are.
Yep.
So it's one of those things that go back and forth, but there's a lot of jealousy in the Bureau from people who want to do it. And then there's a lot of decisions at headquarters that you don't understand. So all my stress came from that side. He was 100% right. But it's one of those things. I ended up getting to do that. I left there, and then HRT, you got to do a 2-week selection. That's really hard. I ended up having to go through it twice. I didn't get selected the first time. Went back a couple years later, a couple more years of maturity and stuff like that. Went back up, did well, got selected, and then transferred up to Quantico in 1999 to be on HRT. And then I ended up doing a lot, because of 9/11, doing a lot of overseas, embedding with the special forces overseas. I've done a lot of time in Afghanistan, both tactically on the ground, and then as an assistant legal attaché, and then the legat, who's in charge of all FBI operations. So I have almost 4.5 years in Afghanistan alone from that.
When you got selected for the undercover stuff, did you go through any psychometric testing or anything like that?
So they do. So it's about 8 hours of psychological testing. So they really want you to understand. They want to understand, but they also want you to understand how you are, and how people perceive you in that. So it's funny because when I went up there and did it, and they're looking for a team player who can act individually, because you are part of a team, the case undercover and the bureau, but you have to act individually type of thing. When you look at sports like, hey, football and basketball, I think are really truly sports, but something like tennis is individual, but something like baseball, where on defense, you're out there as a team, but you have individual effort, like when you're at bat and things like that. So it's one of those that they're looking for a very focused team player that can act individually. And they have a whole, like, having done testing, they really understand who does well undercover wise. And I did very well, but the woman had told me that the doctor told me after testing, she goes, "Oh, you're like the guys across the street." And I'm like, "Well, who's that?" She goes, "Oh, the HRT guys." Because it's kind of the same thing. They have this mental block that they normally see that do well on HRT. And she had said, yeah, you have the same profile there. And end up, obviously, a number of years later, going back to the team where they also do psychological testing,
right,
to get on those things. They normally just don't give them to regular agents, but if you're getting into it, and then every 6 months undercover, they take you out of it and then you go retest. It's not the full 8 hours. It's more of the stressors to see if your undercover activity is giving you stress and how you're doing mentally. They do an interview. If you're doing good, they put you back in. And if you're having problems, they'll pull you out of the undercover. And again, that comes from, Joe Pistone, having done 6 years and having all those issues and no one really looking out for him, so to speak. That's one of the big changes on the undercover side.
Yeah, because I mean, the book is absolutely captivating, and he did go through an awful lot there. When you go onto HRT, Hostage Rescue Team, how often would you get deployed?
So after 9/11, it got crazy. So before 9/11, there was regular team deployments for training, and then there was if a mission came up, you were deployed. After 9/11, you would get set up to do a deployment. It could be a bigger team deployment. Like in the beginning of Iraq, we were sending big HRT teams to protect agents who were doing other investigations type of stuff. But we're also embedding with the special forces on 1s and 2s to help them do interrogations and sensitive site exploitation is where you find in the beginning, the military would just, like after 9/11, they went in and they would hit a place and they would just collect everything and throw it in a bag. And then people would be going through the bag months later and saying, hey, here's a list of U.S. phone numbers. Who can we talk to? So there was no association between intelligence and a person to talk to. And the Bureau just had a different way of looking things. So we started associating phones and things to people. It got to be a formal process. We taught it a lot. But a lot of times with the SEALs and the SF guys, we would go on target. We'd do some of the SSE, would help with the interrogations. So those were 1 and 2 man deployments with the military, and then the bigger one. So, and I volunteered for all of them. I don't know how many I did. I really don't, because it comes down. Some of the early days, we're doing 60-day deployments. We're doing 90. We're doing 4 months, and it was just everyone I could go on because I thought that's where we needed to be. I volunteered for. But even after those deployments, then you go back and you'd be on the team, and then you'd have to go to Key West for training. You'd have to go here for training. I was probably gone in those years 75% of the time. It wasn't all overseas. I do have a lot of deployments. There's some guys that volunteered more and more for the overseas stuff, and there's some guys that didn't care for it. But you were still gone a lot. It's now more formal, where it was getting crazy to how long you're gone, and the guys were leaving the team for it, and some other issues physically. So they kind of revamped it to mission support and training. So if you're on mission, you're locked down at Quantico. If something happens around the country, that's the unit that goes. And then support, you can go to all your different schools. And then your training one is before you take mission, your team, your unit is there to make sure that you do all the right qualifications to go on mission. You have it, so you're kind of locked down, but so if the mission team does fly away, you're the next one up there. So they formalize it. They're still gone a lot, but they formalized it so you had more of an understanding of when you were going to be, because it got to the point where my wife had just said, don't even tell me you're like going until you know you're going. And like, there's a couple, I did some really odd ops, like chasing pirates and stuff, where I deployed with the military guys, went overseas, and then it led to 2 months of chasing this pirate around Africa. And every like week I'd tell the kids I'd be home. And finally, she said, look, just don't tell them you're going home until you're going home, because it's just an up and down for them. And it was hard on them. It really was. And I think hopefully now they understand some of the reasons I was gone, because I think when they're younger, they didn't. They just knew Dad was gone all the time.
Yeah, and when he says he's coming back, he lets us down.
Yeah.
And that's tough, isn't it? That's hard as a dad.
It is. It's really tough, because you do the HRT. Like if I'm home and the kids had something, I would take off and go to it. Like there's like, you can do things that way, because the team really understands when you deploy that much. Like when you're home, you got to make it count. But there's other times that you just weren't around. I was lucky though. I didn't miss a Christmas until 2015. I think was the first. Just the way things worked out. But I was gone for a lot of birthdays and other things. Sure. And then you kind of take it for granted. I remember I was off Africa on a Navy vessel with some special ops guys. We were looking for someone that was out there for a number of weeks, and it was Father's Day, and I had my own satellite phone, so I went up to the deck that night just to call the kids to let them say Happy Father's Day. And my kids knew when I call, you don't ask certain questions, you just talk. So we're going through it. And then one of my daughter's friends happened to be over, and I knew her, and she said, oh, so-and-so wants to say hello. And I said, oh, great. So I say hello. And this was probably a year or so after I chased the pirate around. So, and the pirate wasn't a counterterrorism op, so it wasn't as classified. So I actually end up getting a medal for it. So I could talk to my kids about this piracy thing, because it wasn't on the classified side. But this one, we were hunting some Al-Shabaab guys, and this friend goes, "Oh, Mr. D, are you hunting pirates in Africa?" And the phone just gets snatched away from her, and it was my wife grabbing the phone saying, "Hey, goodbye, hon. We'll talk to you later." And my wife said, "Oh, we don't ask Mr. D where he is or say anything about that when we talk." And she felt so bad.
Yeah.
But here's our family thinking, well, everyone's kid doesn't ask where their dad is because they're off, some continent looking for people, and they not supposed to talk on the phone about it. So I kind of like put back on it. Like, here's my kids are, very young age. They know, well, you can't talk about things to your dad on the phone because of this. And their friend comes over and they, it's not that way in every house. So it got to a point where it was just understood. And I think there's some issues from it. If you look back on it, just not being there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get that. I've told this story before. My son got to the national hockey finals, and actually I was in Washington when he was playing, and I'm getting updates over a mobile phone, over a cell phone as I'm working, and it's just, it is hard. I've never done the things that you've done internationally, but it is hard when it comes to balancing family life and an active career.
It's one of those things like that, and my wife never gave me a hard time. She understood that's who I was. She gave me a hard time about certain things, like getting out and doing things with certain of the kids, or my son, or my other kids and stuff. Just talking about like, hey, when you're here, you need to do this, and you need to spend more time. And if the pirate story is funny, there's a show called FBI True on Paramount Plus, season 3, episode 8. Is me talking about this pirate story. And hopefully, like, some people are looking at doing some other things on it. And it's really just, it's a crazy story. It's Catch Me If You Can across Africa. It has some really high ups and some really, really downs because of some things that happen. But in the beginning of the story, I'm up at Virginia Beach with the SEAL Command that I was a liaison to. And Gina had said, "Hey, look, you really need to do some things with Russell." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to come home early this week. We're going to go up. We're going to get some pizza at his favorite place. We're going to do all this stuff." And so I come home Friday morning, pick Russell up from school, and we go up to this pizza place in, Morehead City, North Carolina. And literally I get my cell phone rings, and I could tell it says non-identified number, which I know is a government, landline. Yeah. And I'm like, and it's one of the SEALs I work with. And I said, he said, hey, because he's not going to talk over, an unclassified phone at all. He's really strict. And Mitch goes, hey, remember that thing we talked about on Wednesday? And what we talked about on Wednesday was how fast could I get up to Virginia Beach from where I lived if I had to?
Right.
And it's a 4-hour drive. And I told him, I said, I think if I'm going blue lights, I can make it in 3 hours. And all he says is, hey, that thing that we talked, I need you to do that right now and be prepared to go somewhere, which was telling me, like, be prepared to deploy. And I said, Mitch, are you kidding me? He goes, no, I'm dead serious. And I'm like, okay. So I hung up with him, called Gina, said, get my work truck ready, put all my clothes and gear that I took out, put it back in. I'm driving Russell home because I have my personal vehicle. I said, I have to go. She never gave me a hard time. When it was work, it was work. Yeah. And that's how the show leads off. Because then I jumped in my car, I drove up to Virginia Beach, and I did make it in 3 hours, but I was going blue lights at about 100 miles an hour the entire time.
Wow. That's bonkers. How did you get into the UAV stuff? Because we're gentlemen of a certain age, and I always put the UAV stuff down to the kids. I mean, you were very senior on that project.
So I ended up coming back. I was the Legat in Afghanistan, and I had planned to retire over there. Like I that was going to be my last gig, and I was interviewing with some companies, and COVID hit. So all hiring kind of like ceased, and I was coming back as a GS-15. So there's not as many positions for that. And I was coming back to my old division, the Critical Incident Response Group. And I'd done everything at HRT. I really didn't want to go back to HRT. In fact, because it would have been like, oh, we'll put them here just as a kind of a whole job. So I didn't want that. Like, I'd be taking up someone else's spot. And they started talking, and I ran the HRT's tech side for a while. I like technical stuff. I like, I'm a kind of a geek at heart. So they had the counter unmanned aircraft system, and it was going more operationally, and it was taken from her. It was in between two divisions. SERG took it over, and they just kind of needed someone to run the ops. There's a policy side. I'm not a great policy person, but I like getting out there. So they asked me, said, hey, look, do you want to take over as kind of like ops chief for this counter unmanned drone? And when I was in Afghanistan, drones were an issue. They were starting to become an issue type of thing. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. And I remember getting on the first phone call. It was during COVID. So half of this was from my house. And I'm taking Teams calls and stuff like that. And I'm a technical guy. I didn't understand a word these guys said for 4 months. And I'm writing stuff down, and then I'm calling the guys back. I'm like, hey, you said this, a whole different acronym set. But then we started deploying, putting the counter drone systems up, and I learned by doing. So I climbed up all the staircases with them with equipment. I set it up, and I don't think they're used to a GS-15 getting that active, because I'd race them up. I'm like, hey, my time up those stairs was 37 seconds. See if you can beat it with this bot. But I started learning from just watching them, because they're so smart, unbelievable what they were doing, so far out of it. And I think about 6 months, I started really kind of, okay, I understand what this is. But I'd sit and watch them. I'm like, well, why did you do that? And they're like, oh, you noticed. I'm like, yeah, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? So I understood the process. I really enjoyed it. I learned a ton from them, and counter drones now is huge.
Oh yeah, it is. I find it fascinating. I was watching on the news the Ukrainians using the drones to go and eliminate the Russian drone pilots, and it's very, very Star Wars. When you were out on active service, I mean, you must have lost people in the field. How did you deal with that as as an active military personnel or within the FBI? How was that?
So this is tough. I I just look at things a bit differently. In the beginning, there's been a number of guys from the soft community that have died while I've been there. And that's just tough. I mean, and most of them are young guys. And then I don't know, like I have a way to put it away, and eventually maybe someday all those Pandora's boxes will open, so to speak. But I did go to war later on in life. I wasn't 18 or 19. I think a lot of the PTSD, when you see some of the things that happened over there, being that young, and I think with the soft guys, you're more mature, you've seen more, you have the ability more to do things. Some of those young units, they don't have freedom of being able to, I don't want to say like get back, but when something happens, to do things. But it's tough. It really is. And you see the sacrifices, like they go out and they know they might not come back, and they still do it. And it's crazy. There's been a couple times, like I've had some really good friends from deployments, and then I'll come back into like the SEAL command, and then I'll see his picture up that he died, and I hadn't heard about it when it happened, type of thing. One of them, Josh Harris, he was a regular SEAL when I was over with him in what year was that? 2003 or 4 in Afghanistan. Just this young guy that was so good. He always led point for the SEAL platoon I was with, and we would sit and have coffee and talk all the time. Just like so much ahead of him. And then he went to a special SEAL unit, and I think it was in 2010 he got killed, and I hadn't known about it. So I saw him and met him in 2003 and 4. We stayed in touch here and there, but then he goes over to the special SEAL unit, and I go down to do a deployment with him, and I look on the wall, and there's his pictures. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my God. Like it hit me hard. Because you didn't know, and you wanted to do things. And then there's like Extortion 17s, when the helicopter went down and 38 people were killed. And there had to be about 20 SEALs in that. And that was a unit, when we talk about the pirate story, who I deployed with was that unit.
Right.
So I knew them from that deployment very well. And then 6 months later, every one of them is killed. And again, it's one of those overwhelming things that you're like, and I just believe in like people is a destiny of stuff, because I've seen you've been there, and like one guy gets killed and one guy doesn't, and there's a lot of survivor's guilt from the guy who doesn't. Like, why not me? Why him? And I've just gotten past, like, so many good people die. I don't question anymore. Like, well, why was this good person, this evil person, not killed? And then there's a few teammates who died in unfortunate things from HRT. I wasn't at them, but the team is a lot smaller, and it's just catastrophic. We had 2 guys die in a training accident. They were doing shipboard takedowns, and there was a problem with the helicopter, and and these guys were on the rope as they're fast roping down. Helicopter almost crashed, and both of them were killed. And that's unbelievable, again, because it's such a smaller community and tighter that happens. I just got to a point where, like I said, I just deal with it a bit differently. I stop questioning what I can't control. And I look at it, if it was me, and this, well, it sounds odd, but at least they died doing something they love, because I know they all love doing that. That doesn't take that back from the family not being able to be there, but it's an understanding, like if that happened to me, what I would kind of want. And I think a lot of guys in these type of units kind of understand that it's their choice. They volunteer a number of times to get where they're going, and every guy that you talk to in the SEALs and Green Berets and HRT, like if you're doing an entry, every guy wants to be the number one guy. Like, you want to be where the action is. The guy behind you's got your back, and that's an incredible feeling. And if something happens during that, then it happens during that.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're professional military or law enforcement, and they know the risks that are wrapped around it. Firearms, and certainly within the states, we a lot less. Although we remember the death of Ian Dybell yesterday, who was a colleague of mine who was off duty, challenged somebody with a gun and was shot. And we don't carry guns. You know, that's the bottom line.
Some of the tougher ones though too, or that you don't hear as much about, the guy who retires and then dies shortly after retiring. Mark Giuliano is a former deputy director of the FBI, phenomenal leader, just a great guy. And he had an unbelievably great job, and just passed away. And I don't know, still haven't heard, what from, but here, his daughter, I think, just got married, and this is this what you work for so that you can retire, and the grandkids, and they don't get to have that. And it's one of those things that you're like, if you look back on it, would he have worked less knowing that? And absolutely, it's the same thing with all the other things. But you can't undo it. You can't change who you were and what you did. I think though, it's like when you go over to Iraq and Afghanistan, you appreciate the small things. You appreciate being able to do the really little things. And when you get back, you see people that don't appreciate it. There's some hard feelings back. I think that's some of the things that you see with the soldiers and stuff coming back. Because when absent it, you appreciate it. So when you have a life and death experience, I think you appreciate the day-to-day things more than the other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But how do you feel now after, we've handed back power to the terrorists, for want of a better word, but that's what we've done. How do you feel now? Because I lost mates out there. It seems it's quite a hard thing to come to terms with. All those great people lost their lives, to hand back a community to the people that were causing the problems in the first place.
You're specifically talking about Afghanistan. I think that that's the biggest picture that you're looking for. And I have so many mixed feelings having spent so much time there. And I have some unbelievable friends that are Afghan. Some didn't get out, some got out, some got out way before. I've lost a lot of people, friends, acquaintances in Afghanistan. And for it to go back to the way it was, it's hard. But when you kind of look at, I don't fault anyone overall in general. And you can say that the execution of leaving Afghanistan was horrible. And I don't like to throw politics into things. I always knew after my last deployment, eventually it was going to have to go back. It was an unattainable goal for what people had. And the problem was, like, when you start looking at the deployments, when you deploy someone a year at a time, you can tell they would do great work, and then a year later they're gone. Someone else would have to come in. And it was just one of those things like, is this the way to really run this war? And it went up and down with Iraq, and Iraq took a lot of resources from it. There's all kinds of things I can talk about with that too. But Afghanistan in general, when you look at the history, it's no surprise how it went. And unfortunately, I think people, didn't take lessons learned. I think there's competing goals of what people wanted from it and what they thought they could achieve. And people get over there and they really want to do the right thing. The enemy knows about patience, though, too. It's one of those things that they understand because they see the history of the U.S. involvement in places. I don't hold it more so like, oh my God, they lost their lives for nothing. They didn't lose it for nothing. They went over for a mission. They were doing things that in support of that, and you're over there protecting your brothers on left and right of you. Like, I mean, when the bullets start flying, like all that upper stuff goes away. You're there for your brother or sister right next to you, and you're doing things that aren't normal because of that. So I'd never say anyone was, died in vain. And you look at all our wars like that to a point. So it's one of those really tough things that you go back and forth on. I think policy-wise, it could have been done better. I think I blame some of the Afghans. Some of the Afghans robbed us blind
Oh yeah.
with the money that they were getting, and it was just for themselves. I also know Afghans that were unbelievably under threat and still doing the right thing, and we're trying to make it a better place. And so it goes back and forth. There's good and bad on every side of the table. And you look at, was it a nationalist war? The Taliban's different from Al Qaeda, different from the Haqqanis, and what when you really start looking at the micro relationships over there, it gets very, very complicated. I've had some great scholars and journalists really have years and years of time there, kind of clue me in on some things that I never really realized and stuff.
Yeah, it's a very interesting subject, and as you say, if you go back a couple of centuries, they were fighting then, and they won in a different way, and they returned it back to their family.
I never believed, even with Iraq, that our democracy in America is going to be stood up anywhere else. You have to that's not an achievable goal.
No,
at all. So if you think you're going to go in and stand at this other nation up like us, that's not going to work. It's just not going to happen. And if you look at the problem Iraq was after World War I, where you took Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds and tried to make them into one nation state. Who thought that was going to work? So and the problem stemmed back to to it. And then when we oust Saddam, who's a Sunni, we think, okay, we're going to work with the Shias, and then we're going to put them in, and they're going to say, oh, we're going to do it right this time. No, they're like, okay, we're going to pay back for all the stuff that happened to us.
Yeah.
And the American people just don't get it. But that's thousands of years behind it. And it's one of those things. So I don't think, we can just take our democracy and, hey, it's going to work for this place over here. I think that's naive in general.
So how did you feel when you handed back your creds, and you still keep yours? We don't. You see, you get a retired badge, don't you? We don't get to keep anything.
We don't get a retired badge. We get an ID that says retired. And then if you look back, there is my credentials from when I was on active. Right. And they have holes drilled in it, says retired, and they frame it for you. Oh, cool. So I was ready to retire. The course I'd taken in the Bureau taught me out as a GS-15. I didn't do all the things I needed to be, quote, a senior executive service type person. I was unfortunately looking at job money-wise because I had 4 kids in college. I probably jumped too early to a company I should have understood more and how poorly something was run. But I was ready. It's a young man's game, like HRT, if I did a day of what they're doing, my body would break down. That's a young man's game. I'd done my share of it. And same thing with the Bureau. I think I'd gone to where I really wanted to. I wanted to do more, but I wasn't in a position where I could go up and do something else. So I was at that point. I don't let it identify. And I've seen a couple people say this, as they get out, there's a lot of people that get out because one day you're a special agent, you can carry a gun on a plane, you can do all this stuff. And the next day you're not. And I've seen that with a lot of guys in the SEALs. One day they're a SEAL, and the next day they're a former SEAL. And there's a big difference.
Yeah.
You have to understand that that's not who you are. It's something that you did, and it's something that shaped you, but it's not your identity. I was an FBI agent, and I see it on some people on how they advertise on their LinkedIn and on their, all the other things. They just, FBI. Yeah, it's something I did, and it gives me a perspective, and I share it on podcasts and news things. But that's not me. It's something I did. So, and I'd heard this before. So I was well aware of that dramatic change between one day you're an agent, one day you're not. And kind of understood. I still have a purpose. I still want to be helpful. I want to do things for people. I want to be on this certain side of things. But I'm not an FBI agent anymore. But and I love to talk to people about how to get to become an FBI agent, because a lot of people help me. So I'm always willing, even if it's a kid in grade school, I'll talk to them and say, hey, these are the things that you really need to do, because you can do certain things in grade school, high school, and college that will prevent you from being an FBI agent. So if you really want that, you have to, like, this is the best way to go there because people help me. So I always wanted to give back and help it for other people, but I don't regret, like, oh, I wish I just was talking to a friend of mine and he asked, and I said, what I miss most is the people I worked with. I don't miss the bureaucracy of some of the things going on, but I miss that, like, you can really trust, and you have a core of people that, you know, put job before so much else. Will watch your back, even though there's some politics in there. But it's not like the corporate side. I just disappointed. Even some of the guys that have gotten out of the military and go into the corporate world that are just, you know, cowardly in how they do things. They tell you one thing and they don't mean the other. So I miss the people that I work with. And I tell people, stay, like if you really love it and you don't have to leave for the money, stay as long as you want, because it is a great job.
Yeah, of course.
But then once you decide, that's it. Don't look back.
Do you know what I find really difficult now? When I was in the cops and I had my teams, and I'd say to someone, say to the sergeant, right, can you? I'm going off duty. Can you make sure that report is on my desk before I come back tomorrow morning? And they would do it. It would be done. You know, everything would be done. I deal with some companies and they don't do things. It just takes so long in the outside world to get things done. And I find that really frustrating. I'm just almost 9 years into retirement. I'm just getting used to that. Yeah, we'll do it, but we'll do it at our speed. Whereas I'd be like, come on, guys, I want that. We're remanding that prisoner tomorrow. We're doing, you know, you're going to court. We'd get it done, because it's a different feeling now.
It is. And so, also, like people just don't show up for meetings on time, and I'm like, oh, are you kidding? But, you know, I actually got addicted, I think, overseas to the sense of urgency. Even there's a sense, like you talk about what you experience, that's here in the States with law enforcement, but you go over to units like JSOC and these other folks overseas, the urgency is like, as one of the JSOC commanders told me, like, you're on a speeding train. You don't realize you're on a speeding train until you get off. And I've been with them. I served a number of years with them and didn't realize. Now, some of it, like they got me computer systems where I could do classified work at my home. And I started doing that too. And again, I should have been doing movie night with the kids. And I'm over on my laptop. I am in the commander in Syria as he's, you know, killing ISIS folks. Until you get off that speeding train. But the sense of urgency overseas, I got addicted to, because there was no, like, it was just one thing after another. And people, especially that, like, you would have a bunch of like deployers that would be over there 4 months, and they would just, you work them 20 hours a day, and they loved it because they were doing things that they hadn't seen before and done before. So your entire workforce was like that. And the military guys you're working with, you get addicted to that absolute everything now. And as soon as something happens, like, entire military staffs jumping on something and making it happen. And that gets addicting.
Yeah, I bet it does. So what does the future look like now? You're out.
I'm still grinding. I'm trying to, after the corporate thing, I kind of want to do it on my terms. Though what I'm finding is, like, I like doing the news commentary. I like doing the podcasts. I really like, and I think people appreciate the insight that you can give them. And maybe this is where I come back to, I like hearing that, like, someone had listened to it and really gained some insight from someone who's done it, who's been there, say, hey, look, these are the cool little things that you're not seeing, or this is, you know, how it was, or I don't, like, I talked to you on the phone, like, some people get on and they sell vapor, like, they're saying stuff and you're like, what are they talking about? And you look at their history and they hadn't even done some of the things that they're talking about. So I like to try to stick it. Sometimes the news, though, I remember it was a counter-espionage incident. I think it was the National Guard guy that was given, you know, postage secrets or something. And the news said, hey, have you worked counterintelligence? And I said, well, I've worked at counterintelligence cases, especially when I was an ALAT and a LEGAT, because you work everything. I said, but I wasn't a counterintelligence agent. Like some agents are just a counterintelligence back here in the States. And he's like, oh, okay. And then as soon as the news pops up and my byline goes up there, Rob D'Amico, former counterintelligence agent. I'm like, oh, are you kidding?
Yeah.
Because I'm worried about someone seeing that and saying, Rob wasn't a counterintelligence agent. And I went back to the producer. I said, hey, I told you, but they're looking for what meets their thing. So I'm careful about it. I try to label that. And it's one of those, I think, you know, your credibility goes on the line, that if people see me talking, I'm not saying something I haven't done, or if I haven't done it, but I kind of know about it, I say that to a point. But I do like doing that. And it's one of those things I'm working on a couple, helping a writer with the series that we talked about. And for a long time, it's funny because I never talked about a lot of the stuff I did. And my second youngest was in the car with their friend. They're 14, maybe. They're both in the backseat of the Suburban and talking, and I'm driving them somewhere. And they start talking about The Sopranos. And I said, oh, that's funny. I said, you do know I went undercover against the guy that they based the main character off of. And they're like, no, are you serious? I'm like, yeah. They're like, why don't we know this? And I'm like, I just never, I didn't know, one, you were into The Sopranos. You know, maybe, like, again, I was gone a lot. So, but it was funny. And then some people like the stories. I'm used to being around soft guys that, like, if you're playing cards or you're drinking, everyone's telling a story.
Yeah.
And some of them, like, I know some guys who've won the Congressional Medal of Honor. So someone said, well, how are you humble with everything you did? I'm like, because I've been around people that have done a lot more than me, and they're humble. Like, they're the quietest guy in the room, and you're finding out the dude killed the most people.
Yeah.
So, but when you're around soft guys, they're very secure in who they are, type of thing, and everyone's telling a story. It's not like anyone's one-upping each other. They're just telling experience, like, oh, that was cool. Like, I was there right after, and all these things come out, and it's not a competition, again, because they've done these things. But on the civilian side, sometimes I forget where I was living. I was going to a couple, weekly poker games, and I was just telling stories again about chasing pirates or whatever. And it got back to me that, oh, you're one-upping everyone. And I stopped just going, because I'm like, well, that's not, like, I just don't have regular stories. That's not what it is. So I stopped talking a lot about it to folks that weren't, the SEALs and other guys that, have done just as much as you had, and you're just enjoying each other's stories and stuff. And then people started, like, really saying they wanted to hear more. And it got to a point where I went on, and I do think positive stories for the FBI need to come out. It's a great organization. It's getting hit really hard right now with all kinds of, it's gotten political. So I want people to understand what sacrifices FBI agents have done and the great work they've done. That's why I went on FBI True, and the producer of the show, former FBI agent. That's her goal, is to get good stories about the FBI out. So I absolutely agree, because it was a crazy story, lots of ups and downs. And if you watch the show, you figured that out. I also want really good people to watch the show, like kids, to say, I want to do that, because they need those people to want to. They need good people to get in the bureau. So maybe some of them in second grade watch it and they write, I want to be an FBI agent, like, I did. So that's part of it too. And it's not bragging, because, like, when I talk about the pirate, it was a team. Like, I always say I'm like Forrest Gump. I fell into things, but it's a team effort. I didn't like some of the bureau promotion things. Like, they make you write, what have you done? And the final one, I didn't get the job. I forget what I put in for, but I was so tired of writing that. What I did, I haven't done anything in the bureau alone. I've been a part of a team for everything I've done. And I wrote it that way, saying, like, hey, look, it's not admitting that you're not good. It's admitting that you're with the team, and you're a good player on the team, and you can do this. It's not a solo opportunity saying, I did this, these are my credits. Instead, saying, I was with the team, I played a pivotal role. It might even not have been a big role, but it's like, every person on a football team is needed. Every person on this is needed.
Yeah.
And you have to do that. So I try to like bring that to some of the things that I talk about. They're team events, like great guys that I did the pirate thing with, Brian and Lance, and like unbelievable. I couldn't have done it. Like, thank God, like Brian, who was my teammate at the time, he just coming out of field office and he still had all the experience about collecting evidence. I forgot more about collecting evidence on that job, and thank God he had just come out. So, but everyone played a pivotal role, and it wasn't one person. So it's an opportunity. I try to balance it. I get told a lot of people like, hey, you should write a book. I'm really hesitant only because a book is so individually about what I did. And it like, I fell into everything. I do, but some people are like, oh, but it's a great story. I'm like, I don't want the story to be about me. I want it to be about the Bureau and the people I work with.
But you see, you could do a factional, couldn't you? So you could do a faction book, and it's a difficult one because I'm with you. I was part of a great team. I was one of many people that went round solving murders. That's what we did for a living. You know, for 8 years, that's what I did, homicides. But I was a workaround. I also get it. You have to have senior investigating officers who do their story and how they did it. But I was one of many people that did some brilliant things to bring people to justice. But, you know, we're not shrinking violets, because if we were, we wouldn't be doing this. So
yeah,
it's how you sell that, because I do get some negative feedback from former colleagues because they don't want you to talk about these things, but the public need to know, because actually, in a roundabout way, they're our paymasters. They need to know they're getting value for money. And if we're getting these great stories out there, it shows that we didn't spend 30 years with our thumbs up our backsides.
It is. It's a tough. I remember HRT, you know, like the quiet professionals. You know, the soft guys, quiet professionals. You do your job. You don't talk about it. Well, I remember during the wars and stuff, the HRT wasn't talking about what they did, and our funding wasn't getting it. So Les was the commander, and he started, and a couple others after him started having these congressional staffers come down, and we're giving them capabilities briefs. And some guys like, oh, we should like, but that's how we ended up getting funding.
Yep.
So that the people who are, you know, the purse strings of the United States understood what we're doing and why we needed money.
Yeah.
So the same feeling goes out across HRT. They've done some incredible things. And like half the people in the US think HRT is hormone replacement therapy. Like they don't even know what it is. And when you're on the team, you think everyone knows about you. But if you don't start coming out with some of the stories that people see, they don't understand what the team's doing and why. Like, you want someone to look at and say, that's what I want to do. Same thing like in the Bureau in general, you want them to understand, and you don't want it to be that boisterous individual saying, oh, look at me. You want to be like, hey, this is what the team does.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people on the team that like, no, we don't want that movie to come out. We don't want this book to come out. And I've had people talk to me about it where they've gotten some negative impact. They want to write a book. They want to talk about it. And I said, look, I've read some books, you know, out there. They've done justice. They've talked well about the team or the FBI, and someone's going to read it and understand it. But it is your experience. Like, if you want to talk about it, if you want to talk about it in all kinds of different ways, I think you should be able to. And like I said, is it boisterous? Like, hey, look what I've done. It all how it comes out. And I said, but it's a personal thing. Like, you know, I think a lot of people get therapy. The more I talk about having been gone from my kids so long, I get feedback from people saying, but during the time after 9/11, we thought that the terrorists were going to invade the country, and you were doing. It was a total, like, it's hard to understand. You were around at 9/11, what the crazy scenarios that were coming out of what was going to be done, and what we were going overseas to do. I look back on it now, and there's some mistakes that were made, or, you know, whatever. But I thought I was protecting from there, but it's also who I am. I want to be in the action. But the more I talk about being gone and how the kids will see it and feel about it, the more therapy for me that I get. So if someone, I just, again, the book is really tough on me because it's so much about, it'd be about me and what I did. And I think a lot of people would take that as braggart. Like I fell into the undercover thing. Like that wasn't, and I just did what I naturally did type of thing. And then HRT, you volunteer to go there and you get, how you get picked on certain missions to go and be involved in is just the luck of the dice roll, so to speak. And I worked with, like I said, I worked with phenomenal guys. Someone like said, how do you stay, humble? I'm like, humble? Are you kidding? Like, I literally and I remember I was in Afghanistan and one of the Army Special Mission Unit guys that I knew, he's like, hey, you see that guy you just talked to him? I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, he's about to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. I'm like, are you kidding? And like, no. I'm like, most humble dude in the world who is just like whatever. And that's who you're around. And they'll never tell it to you. Someone else will tell it to you. So, those days of like, hey, if you think like if you're running around with these guys, like they've done unbelievable things. And like I said, that's where sharing the stories is great because you can hear, you're like, holy cow. And they thought like it was funny. Like one of the units I was with at one point, we were talking about something around the campfire. And I just started talking about the undercover stuff. And they thought that was so cool. But I thought what they were doing was cooler than that. And it was one of those back and forth things where you have mutual respect for each other and you just love hearing some of the things they've done.
Yeah, and they are brilliant people. I had a guy on here called Simon Maloney, and he won the CGC, and which was the second highest award. And he got shot through the neck, and the bullet came between his windpipe and his Adam's apple in Afghanistan. He got back on the roof. And he shot the man that had shot him. I mean, what? And he had me in tears. I'll be honest with you. He's but they're fantastic people. You're now running your own business. What does that look like, and what do you do for work now?
So it's grinding. It's one of those things where I don't have anything steadily established that you're just grinding for it. I work with also a cyber company, again, people I trust, former NSA, former agency, all these kind of other acronyms you never even heard of. Crazy smart on the cyber side, that I'm now working with them, and I really enjoy it. Again, I'm learning. I bring in a different perspective on how I do things like negotiation. So if someone's gets ransomware and it gets encrypted, and you got to negotiate with the cyber actors to get your data back, type of thing, but also some other things. But it's great working with them because again, I'm learning, but I'm also putting from an operation. I operationalize technology very well, so I'm putting that in. On the security consulting side, that can get frustrating. People, they have this threat. It's like time, and the money doesn't matter, and you need something, and then money does matter when you end up putting your cost estimate down, type of thing. But it's one of those things that you're just grinding to get to that point. I have like 8 different pokers in the fire on the media type side, that you're hoping works out to the point where you can my fear, I'd much rather be in a firefight than not make enough money to support the family. That's where my fear comes from, and it's one of those. I'd much rather jump back into Iraq or Afghanistan than worry about how I'm going to do the next month financially with a company that's just you. So it's one of those things that you're grinding on and on. I think I have some great leads, but nothing happens fast, especially in the world of Hollywood and, getting a contract signed by a company. But I am with some really good people. I'm with a company, Apostle X, that's actually probably half British, half American, some former SAS guys. And they're great. Like, again, it's like you can trust them. You understand it. You all had the same background. And another former FBI guy up in Boston who's just great to work with. And I think that's going to take off. It's some working with encrypted apps, which is coming from being able to use those to build networks. So I think I have some really good things out there. But you're grinding and you're worried. You're worried about the next month. You're worried about this. Is this going to come through? And it's a different worry for me. Like I said, it's something that having a government job, you kind of never worried about that. and now you're doing it. And you talk to folks, and there's ways to get through it and stuff. But it's, I guess, I don't mind the other unknown of what's going to happen when you go somewhere. It's what's going to happen with your ability to do certain things financially, because the company, isn't like, you're not getting this contract yet, or you think you are, and then they put it off, type of thing.
But we're institutionalized, aren't we? Because at the end of the day, we spent 30 years not having to worry. Yeah, I worried about budgets because I used to get told off by my boss. But the reality is the job still had to be done. So we've got people out there doing the work, and I deal with all the politics and the monies at the end of it. But we were institutionalized. Now we have to worry about the budgets, don't we? The other thing, I don't know what it's like in the States, but the hardest thing for cops in this country, law enforcement who run their own businesses, is knowing what to charge. And we're very benevolent, because people will knock on your door and they'll say, I've got this problem. You say, yeah, I can do that for you, without even talking about a cost, because that's how we roll. I can do that. And then you think, would I want to be paying that? And then it becomes but as I say, we're quite benevolent. But listen, I've had a really good time. I hope I've asked you some questions that you haven't been asked before. You
have. Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I hope you've enjoyed the experience. Thank you so much for your time. But in the UK, when we take a statement under caution, we use a phrase, and the phrase is there anything you'd like to add, alter, or correct in relation to your statement?
I'm not falling for that, because that's where I admit I did this, and it's one of those things. I always tell people, don't ever talk to the cops without a lawyer. What are you, crazy? Like that's the dumbest thing you can do. And you always want a good lawyer when you need one. But it's funny. So like I said, I haven't done this type of podcast or interview before. Like I said, I've done news commentary where you got to get what you say in 3 minutes out, and they're going to the next story. I've done podcasts where there's a couple other people on. It's cool to get their different perspective and stuff, but never kind of this interview with me. And it kind of oh, wow, this is about me, which again, as much as people are oh, you're an extrovert, I'm no, I'm not. Like I said, it is literally like a Forrest Gump career. I somehow lucked out to do what I got to do for so long, and with great people, unbelievable people. And it's funny, even from the Marines, when I do some of these, I'll have a guy saying, hey, I saw you on this, and I hadn't seen the guy in 35 years. And it goes back to a time you remember it. And it's some just unbelievable people that I've worked with, that it just so some of it it's tough, because you look back on it, and everybody has helped me to get to where I've been, and such like that. And I look back on some of my more immature times, oh my God, I can't believe, type of thing. And you get a little bit embarrassed of what you like then, but it is what it is.
Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon, sir.
Same here. I appreciate it.
God bless, and keep safe.
You too.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. And thank you to my cousin for introducing us.
Yeah.